All right, Mitchell, if you want to stop your video, or you can just leave it on, I suppose. There we go. Great. All right. Awkward start to the chat. I think we're ready to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event today. My name is Rachel Molland, and I'm with Penguin Random House. And apologies for the terribly awkward start. Just a few housekeeping notes before we bring John and everyone out to discuss his new book. If you want to submit questions for him for the end of the event, you can just type it in the Q&A module or in the chat, and then we'll pass them along. And we suggest toggling your chat from all panelists to panelists and attendees, so everyone can see your questions. Yeah, and I'm gonna just ask our speakers to come on and to discuss John's amazing new book, Time for Mercy. Yeah, with all of that, I'll get off and I'll stop bothering you all. You are.
Hey, John, welcome. How are you?
Hey, Mitch. Nice to be back. Good seeing you, man.
It's so good to see you too. And thanks for doing this virtual event with us. My only sadness is that right after this, we're not able to go to Joe's for a little bit of stone crabs and a beer.
That was that a year ago, the book festival? I think it was, or 2 years.
It was about a year ago. Yeah, the whole world had shifted. But I have to tell you, man, that this book, A Time for Mercy, is just what I needed. I have, to get lost in this book at this time, in this week particularly. I have to tell you, it's, everyone, I don't know about you, but everyone I know is on edge between the election, between COVID, between everything else. But to get transported through Time for Mercy and to reconnect with Jack Brigance is just what I needed. I got lost for over a day.
Good.
So I thank you for that.
Well, listen, it's a great compliment because that's why I read. I read to escape. I read to learn. I read to be entertained. But I love a book that can take me to a certain location and introduce me to characters and plots. And that's great fiction. It's great literary fiction. It's great popular fiction.
After I thought about that, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but I was reading that remarkable review that was in the New York Times by Sarah Lyle, and I hadn't read it really before, and I read it, and she starts it off in almost the very same way I just did. She goes, "Hello again, Jake Brigance. You've come back at the right time. It's nice to return to the courtroom with someone we trust. It's reassuring to remember that not everyone is crazy and unpredictable, and that books, even books about crime and punishment, can help restore our equilibrium in this season of high anxiety." Pretty remarkable. And yeah. She got it right.
It's very well said. When I started the book in January, Mitch, as I always do each year in January, and I've learned I can do a lot of writing in January, February, March. The weather's not great, and I'm kind of tucked in on the farm, and a nice little warm, cozy writer's nook where I'd love to spend my time, and I get a lot of work done. And then COVID hit the middle of March, and I couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck on the farm like everybody else. Life is not normal, but I couldn't travel, and so I just wrote. I just kept writing, and the book got thicker and thicker and thicker. And so it's the longest book I've written so far because of COVID.
What you've written so many books, and I think you've had, scores of #1 bestsellers. You obviously, you strike a chord in so many people. But what is it about Jake that brought you back? What brought you back to him in this book? I know that A Time to Kill was your very first book and one that you really loved. But what is it about Jake that is so intriguing to you and everyone else?
Early on with A Time to Kill, which came out in 1989 and did not sell, I then wrote The Firm, which was a more commercial, accessible, suspenseful novel, and it did sell. It sold immediately. My plan was to go back to Ford County, back to Jake for another courtroom drama, and kind of alternate the books between Ford County and legal thrillers that can be set anywhere in the country. But the firm was so successful immediately that I said, it might be smart to stick with the legal thriller for a while. And I did. And I stuck with them I'm still writing them. But, years went by. I never forgot about Jake. The movie had a huge impact on the story and the book and the success of the book. The movie came out in 1996 with Matthew McConaughey and a great cast and a great director. And it followed closely the novel, which is all I can ask for as a writer, and became a very popular movie. It's still popular. It's on TV somewhere tonight. The book is still selling very well after all these years. So I didn't forget about Jake, but I was having far too much fun with the legal thrillers set all over the world, really, and traveling around and researching books. And I thought I would bring him back eventually, but also I have to wait on the story. I have to have a really good story that would work with Jake in the courtroom. And in 2013, I published Sycamore Road, which was Jake again, really for the first time on center stage in a courtroom. It wasn't a criminal trial; it was a civil trial with a will dispute. A small fortune was at stake, and so that was enjoyable. What we realized when Jake came back in 2013, we didn't realize how popular Jake had become through the book and especially through the movie with Matthew and people. Jake had a huge following, and that book did extremely well. And I realized that Jake is a pretty popular guy in popular fiction. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to wait 24 more years before I bring Jake back. I'll bring him back when I get a story. And about
So the story came first, and then you said, "This is a great story for Jake."
Mitch, you got to have the story. The story always comes first. The story. I've never started a novel with a character only. It doesn't work that way with me. I've got to have a story. I've got to have a beginning, a strong middle, and a strong ending. A real tight plot with subplots that work. And it takes a long time to plan that and make it all work. But I had to have a really tight plot that would work in a small southern town for Jake to come back. And finally, I got the story a couple of years ago and got pretty excited about it and realized that it was going to work. And I started writing in early January, right after I saw you at the Orange Bowl. We were down at the Orange Bowl because Virginia played Florida in the Orange Bowl. I was down there with some friends, and I came home after that and went to work as I always do in early January for the next novel. And I had the feeling early on that the book was really going to work, and it was going to be a wonderful courtroom drama. About halfway through the book, Renee, my wife, who reads all the stuff and is a pretty tough critic, she was reading one time again about halfway through, and she said, "This is your best book ever." And she does not hand out compliments like that, especially to me. And I thought this is something's going to work here. This is working. And so
I talking about a book like this is really hard because for those who haven't read it yet, you don't want to give any spoilers out. But what's unusual, what I found really unusual, is in the first few chapters, as a reader, you think, my God, this is an open and shut case.
Yeah.
Where is he going to go with this?
Yeah.
And I think what was so, reading your work, particularly your more recent work, and knowing how you've been kind of exploring the criminal justice system and all of that, there's so much of you in this, it seems like. And there's so much of your own kind of sensibility in this. And maybe that's what your wife was reacting to.
When I went back in 2013, I started writing Sycamore Row, and we had some long discussions about whether or not it was a good idea because Jake and I are the same age. We started off the same age. I am aging much faster than he is. He's still 37. I'm 65, same as you, same birthday. I was worried about when I wrote A Time to Kill. I was living that life. I was that small town Southern lawyer, very ambitious, idealistic, wanting to become a big time courtroom lawyer. That was my dream back then. And so the writing of it was just me writing a lot of autobiographical stuff. And the things I think that things that Jake says and thinks and feels and plots and schemes, that's kind of that was me. Well, 20 something years later, I worried about being able to find that voice again. And Renee was not too keen on it. My wife was not too wild about the idea of going back because so much in our lives had changed between 1989 and 2013. Dramatic changes in our lives, and she was worried, and I was too, about being able to sound like Jake again. And I said, okay, look, I'm going to write the first 100 pages of Sycamore Road, and you read it, and we'll discuss it. And we did that, and she read the first chunk of it, and she said, "This is working." And so I said, "Great." And so, I've always had the good sense to listen to her because she's always been there to read the stuff as I write it, and she's no pushover. We had a conversation last night about the book I want to write in January, start in January, and she's not sold. It'll take some time. Last month, I gave her a 2-page summary of a possible novel that I really liked. She really didn't. And so we talked about that, and I put it aside. I won't do that one now. So it's a process that we go through all the time about.
No, it's wonderful having that relationship of somebody that you trust like that. I noticed that you did the dedication of this book to Sonny, who was another person in your life who you trusted a lot. Talk about that.
Well, Sonny and I were not close. We were close enough. We were not close because Sonny was, the longtime legendary editor of Knopf, the editor, publisher, president of Knopf he was Knopf. And he had such a great run of books and writers he discovered, writers he nursed, writers he molded, writers he believed in. And about 10 years ago, through all the corporate stuff at Random House, Doubleday, still my publisher after all these books, was sort of folded into Knopf. And I became, one of Sonny's writers. And, it was not really something he asked for. It's not something I asked for, but there it was. And we both treat each other with a lot of respect and admiration. And he was very, very supportive. He loves thrillers. As literary as he is, he loved police procedurals and mysteries, and he read everything. But when I turned in a manuscript to Doubleday or Knopf, but within a week or so, I'd get a note from Sonny, and he was always complimentary. He would offer a suggestion or two. He was always spot on, and so we had a wonderful relationship. And losing him was, you can't replace him, but it's a big loss for the company, especially for Knopf. But got some pretty talented people in his place, but he totally missed.
And it's wonderful to be in this community of people who love books and love writers and love great story. And you've been doing it for so long. And it sort of begs the question for me that you've gone back to Jake, and you talked about how you were kind of sort of thinking about whether you could recapture his voice and what you were like as a young lawyer. Mm-hmm. Certainly the law has changed over the years. How has it changed in your perspective? And have the changes been good, or or are they kind of neutral?
Well, a perfect example is this story, because I set the story in 1990, which takes place in Clanton 5 years after the first big trial of Carl Lee Haley, 2 or 3 years after the trial in Sycamore Row. And now it's 1990. And back then, that was my last year of being a lawyer before I quit and started writing full time. In 1990, in your active death states, and you live in one, I live in one, it was not unusual to put 16-year-old kids on trial for murder and capital murder. The Supreme Court, that law has changed dramatically because 10 years ago, the Supreme Court said, you can't do that anymore. It's cruel and unusual punishment. It violates the Eighth Amendment. And so that stopped. But in 1990, again, it was not uncommon for these kids to be treated as adults, indicted for capital murder, face a trial in which they could face the death penalty. And so I wanted to capture that period of time in A Time for Mercy because it was very realistic. It happened all the time. And it, that brings about, because of the threat of the death penalty, the fear of the death penalty, that permeates the whole story. That greatly influences Jake and his defense of the kid and his protection of the family. And it was important to take advantage of what the law used to be. Thankfully, that law has changed for the better now.
Yeah, and it was also, what's interesting is that I guess a more maybe not jaded, but Jake was very concerned with whether or not to take the case. He was very reluctant to take this case, but once he did, he just threw himself into it.
Mitch, I was there. I practiced law for 10 years in a small town like Jake, and the county was too small to have a public defender system. And so when there were terrible crimes, or almost every felony, the judges had no choice but to assign members of the bar to step in and defend indigent clients. And I volunteered for a lot of those as a young lawyer because I wanted to be in the courtroom. And the pay was very low, but I wasn't making much money anyway. I wanted the experience of being in the courtroom. But when there was a really terrible crime, the lawyers would disappear. We wouldn't answer our phones. We'd hide. We'd leave town. We didn't want those cases, and that was very realistic.
You paint an amazing picture of how everyone in town knows one another. In this case, the person who was murdered or who was shot was a policeman who had a dark inner life, but he was well liked in the community. So Jake in essence takes on so much in the community that it reminded me, it's a little like To Kill a Mockingbird in many ways.
There's very much
sense.
It's very much like that. And Jake knew when he heard that there was a deputy sheriff had been murdered, and he knew the guy. It's a small town; they all knew him, and he was a very well liked policeman, around town, deputy sheriff. He had a very dark side that you see in chapter 1, and it gets darker and darker as the book goes on. And but Jake knew that it was a dead cop in a small town, and no lawyer wants that case. In fact, some of those cases back then were so bad that the judges would do what Judge Noose does in this case. He would go outside the district, outside the county, and try to convince other lawyers with no local connections to come in and to the defense. And that was not unusual either. In fact, there were a handful of lawyers we knew who would take really unpopular cases. I was never that brave. As a lawyer, I just didn't want to. I didn't want the community backlash of defending guilty people who've done terrible things. That's right. It's treacherous in a small town, and Jake knew that up front, and he wanted to run from the case. But once he once it was kind of forced upon him by Judge Noose, and once Jake met the family of this 16-year-old kid and realized what they had been through, and he realized they were depending on him for everything almost. He was their advocate. He sort of represented the entire family. And he's finally said, you don't always get to pick your clients, and this is a small town. I'm going to give this kid the best defense I can possibly give. He's my client, and
well, and I think what really makes this, it's Sonny did love thrillers, but he also loved a lot of other things, as many people do. And what is so beautiful about your work is the combination of a very propulsive plot with some remarkable description of town and place, Faulkner-like. I mean, not just because it's Mississippi, but you can feel what it's like when somebody walks into that. I think it's the sheriff who walks in to the to the restaurant, the black sheriff who walks into the restaurant, and you can really feel it and you sense it and you're there. I think that is the extra bonus that you give the reader. It's, there are so many books that are just plot,
right.
But what you do is you hang this plot on such a rich tapestry and deep kind of place, which, transports me away and transports the reader away.
It's not always easy. It's often a struggle to decide how much description you put into a scene, because you can take any scene and describe it from the point of view of any 4 or 5 characters, and you can write about it for 10 pages. You can't do that though when you're writing suspense. You've got to keep the plot moving. At the same time, you've got to give the reader the texture, the layers of the setting and the people and the issues, and that's a constant struggle with me. How fast do you go? How fast do you go? I want the pages to turn, but I want the reader to take something from those pages too. That's not just plot. And again, that's it takes some time. It's often a struggle.
Well, it's a struggle, but you do it so masterfully, and you've done it over so many books. The question, I was talking to a friend of mine who already had read this, and I told him I was having a conversation with you, and his question to me was, ask him how he does it. I know that's probably too vague of a question, but how do you sustain it year in and year out? And they're all so spot on and so beautifully done.
I am constantly searching for the next issue, perhaps, or the next story, and there are a lot of them. I laugh and tell people I watch the law. I watch lawyers, law firms, courts, cases, appeals, lawyers who do crazy things, law firms that blow up, trends in litigation. There's so much litigation that's fascinating. And so that's my world. And that's what I enjoy reading about. Always though, with an eye on what could be a good plot, what could be a good setting. A setting might send me in a certain direction. I guess it comes natural. I mean, being a lawyer certainly helps because I understand that stuff, and I'm just always looking out. And so there are plenty of ideas. There are plenty of stories, and so it's a question of what's the next story going to be? What's the best story I've got? And once I pick that story, once I know I've got a compelling opening, a hook, like in this book, the first chapter is a total hook. Once you read that, you're in for the long haul.
You really are.
And being able to sustain the tension for 300 or 400 pages with subplots and characters, and but all leading up to an ending that's not predictable. I really don't want to give away an ending halfway through. People often say, "Yeah, I had that figured out halfway through."
I never figured it out.
Yeah, I don't think so. Some people can, but they're guessing. So, but I mean that's just the elements of storytelling that I've kind of learned over the years. And
but what's also happened is that your work has now, because you're all about the law, and you just said you read about the law. You also understand the inequities in the law, and that led you to write The Innocent Man, the nonfiction book, and also The Guardians, which is a book I love, The Guardians as well. So talk a little bit about your work, and it has something to do with this book as well, obviously. Talk about your work on the Innocence Project, and where that's taken you, and what your thoughts are about
Looking back with the benefit of some maturity and perfect hindsight, um, I can say that around 2005, 15 years ago, there was a change. And it goes back to The Innocent Man. It goes back to my only work of nonfiction, because when I read about this guy's story, I was totally captivated by it. And I said, I'm going to write this guy's story. I don't care if it's nonfiction. I don't care if it's sales. I've got to tell this story. And once I jumped into the research for The Innocent Man, I shockingly realized that there are thousands of innocent people in prison. And that presents a whole boatload of issues, how, why, how do wrongful convictions happen? And I'm still fascinated by them. I still correspond with several men who are in prison who are innocent. We can't get them out. I've been to see them. I've visited prisons, and I keep up with these guys. They asked me to join the board of the Innocence Project about 12 or 13 years ago. And I said, sure, it's a great board. It's a great organization. And our goal is, our mission is very simple. We believe that guilty people should go to prison and innocent people should not. And we litigate coast to coast to get innocent people out of prison with DNA testing. And it's just very challenging work. But because we get a lot of letters from guys in prison who claim to be innocent and they're not.
Right.
So we have to screen these cases, and it takes a long time to decide whether or not we're going to take a case. And then once we take a case, we throw all of our resources and litigators and great lawyers into the case, and it takes years. Often it takes years to even get DNA testing, or to unwind bad convictions, or to take it to a habeas corpus proceeding in federal court again. And many times the claims have been barred by state laws and federal. So it's I made this point in several books. It's not that difficult to send an innocent person to prison. It's virtually difficult to get them out. It's really hard to get them out, and that's our mission. We've exonerated, I think, 370 people in the last 25 years, one at a time. And it's again, it's very challenging work. But the board, the Innocence Project itself, is it's a nonprofit. We have to raise all of our own money, and very few people who get on the board want to get off of it. It's just that kind of a nonprofit. We're all committed to the work we're doing, and it's very gratifying and meaningful. When we walk somebody out of prison, it's a big moment. It's also bittersweet. The guy just served 30 years for somebody else's murder or rape, and we proved the real killer by DNA. And it's bittersweet to get them out. We keep plugging along.
Well, and not only that with that work, but I think you bring it all out in your work as well, in your fiction too, which I think opens people's eyes. We're at a particularly unique time right now in our culture. What are some of your thoughts when you read about what people are talking about in terms of criminal justice reform and all of that? Do you think we're moving in the right direction? Do you think it's just going to be a passing fad that people talk about, a political hit, so to speak?
Mitch, it certainly feels different. The protests are not going to go away. It just feels like this is a turning point, or maybe it's a stopping place. Maybe we finally come to the point where we say something's got to change, and we could change. We could do so much good if we would reform some of our laws and prevent the mass incarceration of 1 million young Black men in
Right.
prison for nonviolent drug offenses. If we would change some laws and prevent so many poor people from being arrested and held in jails because of cash bail, and then unable to pay their court fines, they stay in jail. I mean, there's laws we could change, basic fair laws we could change that would help the situation and also save a lot of money. You know, before 2016, we were optimistic in that we were seeing some meaningful movement toward the middle on criminal justice reform. From the left, the Democrats proposed these changes for humanitarian reasons, for civil rights, for human rights, and a lot of Republicans feel the same way. From the far right, the Republicans realize we can't afford financially to keep all these people in prison as the population ages, because it's horribly expensive. It's a great drain on the state's budgets. Okay, and so they were moving toward the middle. There was some real conversations about, you know, let's get serious about criminal justice reform. And then 2016 happened, and when Jeff Sessions became Attorney General, he nixed all of it. He didn't care. He does not care about criminal justice reform because he sees no problem. And that's his lack of vision. And so we were set back for years. Again, depending on what happens on November the 3rd, we may see some improvement starting next year. We can get back on track to bring about some real reform. And that real reform could make a big difference in our judicial system in the way it treats poor people and minorities, and it can bring about a lot of fairness that can do a lot of good to help the current tension and problems we have. That with, you know, retraining policemen, that with rethinking police procedures, you know, a lot of elements to it. Maybe disarming, not defunding, but disarming some of these paramilitary police units. You know, do they really need tanks and helicopters and armored car carriers and all the battle gear? They go into these street fights with more gear than our soldiers wore in Vietnam. All this excess military gear that they can buy cheap because it's there, so they arm up, and you know that's got to stop. So I'm optimistic about the election. I'm optimistic about moving back in the direction of some criminal justice reform.
I feel the very same way, and I thank you for talking about all of that. And not only do you know, what I love about you is that you take every aspect of your interest and you find a way of bringing it forward or paying it forward. So talking to somebody else, they were mentioning and asking me to ask whether you are still the commissioner of the baseball fields that you build for the kids in Charlottesville.
Yeah, I mean, I built the ballpark 2020. This will be our 25th season. It's 7 ball fields in one park. It's around the corner from my farm in Virginia. And I built it years ago because there were no ball fields in that end of the county for kids. And so I got mad and built my own ballpark. I still own it. I'd love to give it away, but nobody else wants it. So as long as I own the ballpark, I'm going to be the commissioner, because nobody else wants to be the commissioner either. It's mine to run. It's a wonderful place. We have kids who start T-ball at the age of 4 and play for 11 years until they're 15 and graduate out, and T-ball, softball, baseball.
That's great.
We have some great coaches who've been there for a long time. And, you know, it's recreational ball. It's not competitive travel ball. So there's a level of pressure that kids don't feel. And so we expect to have fun, and everybody who walks in the ballpark is expected to behave because, you know, there's a boss. You know, I can act like the boss and ask people to leave or ask people to behave, and that rarely happens. It's a special place, and what makes it so sad, Mitch, this year the ballpark was empty. You know, we had our draft in early March. I go down, I conduct the draft. We draft 9 and 10-year-old kids and 11, 12-year-old kids. And those drafts are just as pressure packed as the NFL draft, or Major League Baseball draft, picking 9-year-old kids. because I did that when my son was 9. I know what it's like. So we had the teams picked. We had practice schedules, raring to go, middle of March, and then we had to pull the plug and close the ballpark. And it was a very quiet summer at Cove Creek Park, and it's very sad. And kids aren't playing.
Yeah, no, it is. I feel sad for the kids. I feel sad for kids who are, graduating high school,
Yeah,
beginning college, young kids. It's a very, very difficult time
very.
for them. But I know about those pressure-filled. My kids played basketball, and those pressure-filled when they had to be chosen for a team. I think the thing you got to deal with more than the kids are the parents, probably. I assume.
The parents get worse every year. We see more and more of it. Kids aren't playing baseball anymore, in
Right.
like we did. There are too many other diversions. Some good, some not so good. What we see, and we've seen it nationwide, are your elite travel teams where
Right.
these dads whose kids are really good cherry pick your best players in the ballpark, charge the parents a couple $1,000 for the season for uniforms, equipment, room and board, travel. It's all travel, and they go off these big tournaments that happen everywhere now, and they're guaranteed the kids are going to be seen by 50 scouts, and that's what they sell to these people, and it's the American dream, and when you see the big money that these professional athletes are making, it trickles down. And so parents believe their kid's going to either get a college scholarship, which is highly unlikely, or play professionally, which is near impossible. Okay.
Right.
But the dream is still
Dream
very
is there.
it trickles
You're
down to
you're
recreation and it causes problems.
providing a space for all those other kids who just want to play and
Yeah.
have fun. That's a great thing. Let's go. I know we've got a hard out in a few minutes. So let's go to some questions. We have a bunch of interesting questions. So someone in the audience says, which I think is really interesting, is have you ever considered writing a legal thriller set outside of the US?
I've thought about it. And I've been inspired over the years by a couple of cases. Guantanamo has always intrigued me because we have people there now who've been there for almost 20 years and have not been officially charged with a crime. And these were suspects picked up around the world by our, security people and taken to Guantanamo and denied basic rights by us. And I'm not sure how many are still there, but it's always fascinated me. That's not really outside the US. The Amanda Knox case in Italy 10 years ago, I thought was a fascinating case of wrongful conviction and exoneration and still lingering doubts about, but the Italian process was.
It's a very strange legal system, right?
It's very strange. You listen, when you get outside of the U.S., I think we know our legal system because we see it on TV every night and the dramas. But there's some really weird systems around the world. Some have good aspects to them, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go anywhere else in the world. I've got too many stories to tell here.
So talk a little bit more about, so every January you start a new novel. So is there a particular day in January or just started?
January the 1st.
January 1st, you start the new novel. So you've got to come up, you've got to really, do you ever start something and then not continue with it, put it down and pick it up again, pick up something else at that point? Or you're pretty sure you've done most of the the early thinking about it prior to January?
Yeah, I'm doing this is October, almost November. I'm doing the thinking now about the January start. Got a couple of ideas kicking around already. I always have several ideas. Most of them don't work, but there's never been a shortage of ideas. As I get closer to January the 1st, I'll get more serious about my best story and start doing the outline for the story, planning it, the characters, the setting. So by the time I start, I've got a real clear picture of where I'm going and how to get there. And so there's not any stopping and starting. There's never, I've never been halfway through a book and stopped and said, I can't get out of this, which is
Right.
common with writers.
Sure.
I think I have enough discipline up front to prevent that.
I also reading this book and other books, I love your use of names and the names that you chose. And I get a sense of who you're reading. Like in this one, there's Charles McGarry. You have Charles McGarry, and I don't know if you did that on purpose, but I've been a fan of his work as well. So it leads me to, you've always been extremely generous in putting forward the work of other writers. So who are some of the people that you're reading now, or that you can't wait to read, or that you're high on these days?
My pandemic reading project from the literary side was to read all 6 novels by Walker Percy, and he's always been a favorite. And in order, and I'm going through those and almost finished with that now. I thought the pandemic was going to last a couple of months, okay, but now I've got plenty of time. I got the whole winter to read. I when I'm writing fiction, I try to avoid fiction because I want to read writers who are better than I am, and there are a lot of them. And I want to learn. I want to be entertained by good writing, and I want to appreciate. I want to see it. And I want to appreciate it. And so when I'm reading a really good writer, a novel, and I'm trying to write one, I invariably catch myself imitating the person I'm reading, and that's not good. So I've learned to put the fiction down and read nonfiction when I'm writing. I read a lot of nonfiction about legal issues, kind of as research. Um, I read some popular nonfiction guys like, I always like Michael Lewis and David Grand, people like that. Ben McIntyre is a favorite, a British guy. I read every book that John Le Carre publishes when I'm not writing fiction. Scott Turow is one of the best, legal thriller writers around. He inspired me to finish my first book. I'm kind of all over the place.
No, but those are great suggestions. But someone else is asking whether we can expect more Theodore Boone books anytime soon.
Yes, I'm not working on one. I'm not thinking about one. I don't have an idea for one. I've written 7 in the past 10 years. They're a lot of fun to write because I love that kid. He reminds me of myself at the age of 13. And so in some ways, yeah, I hope I write, I hope I write 10 more because they're fun they're a lot of fun to write. And also I'm trying to, in a small way, trying to teach kids a little bit about the criminal justice system and the legal system, and just the basics. What happens in a courtroom? What does indictment mean? What do lawyers do? And so I add some of that into every book as a way to slightly educate kids about the legal system.
Well, I have to tell you, one of the things that I know you did, at least here in Miami, is you started the trend of people leaving the legal profession, because there are so many lawyers who have now tried their hand at writing legal thrillers based on your experience that I know just here in Miami itself. And I'm sure that's something that lawyers have done all over the country. But, I can't thank you enough for this. And you mentioned earlier about how you like to read people who are better than you, but I honestly can say there hasn't been a better book that I have read this year than A Time for Mercy by you. It's got all the elements that I love in a book, which is wonderful writing, wonderful plotting, and I learned something that I wouldn't have known but for this book. So, John, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I know it's kind of wacky that we've done, I think you and I have done like 3 virtual events in the last 6 months. I mean, it's been great to be able to see you, but I can't wait to really see you in person as well.
Well,
So,
Mitch, thank you for those kind words. Thanks for the invitation. If you invite me, I'll always come back. And one day we're going to do a non-virtual book event at Books and Books.
I can't wait. Thank you, John.
I can't
Be
wait.
safe. Have a
Okay.
great
care.
holiday as well.
You too. To see you, Mitch. Take
Bye.
care.
All right. Thanks, Mitchell. And thanks, John. This has been such an amazing conversation. John, congrats on the book. Oh, he's gone now. But thank you to Books and Books. Thank you, Mitchell, for all your wonderful questions. Such a wonderful conversation. Everyone in the audience, as a reminder, you can buy John's new book, A Time for Mercy, from Books and Books, our wonderful event partner, through the link in the chat that I'm resending now. Yeah. Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you.